Okay, we'll start this meeting. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Inshore Fisheries Conservation Authority meeting on Monday, the 20th at 11 o'clock. Just a couple of things before we go into the meeting. I have apologies from Robert Francis, sincere apologies. It's his 50th wedding anniversary. He's on the mainland, he can't come. And secondly, I'd like to welcome Steve Watt back on the committee as an MMO appointment. Welcome back, Steve.
Thank you, Chairman.
And what we'll do, there's going to be a slight variation with the reports. So 4 is going to be Dale on a Waterhall update. 5, we're going to bring in David Fletcher. 6 will be the Chief Officer's report, and then 7 will be the Shellfish Bylaw, right, folks? So, declaration of interest, please.
Chairman, can I declare a non-pecuniary interest as a recreational fisherman?
May I declare an interest as a commercial fisherman?
Lovely, thank you.
And online, Chairman, I have a commercial fishing licence, although it is not currently attached to a vessel.
Thank you for that. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 24th of June. Any questions on the minutes?
Can I just point out one quite serious mistake, actually? I'm sure it's a typo in the review of the policy for issuing permits. It states there that the interim Chief Fishery Officer replied that our limit is 12 metres or 10 tonnes. It's actually 11 metres. I think that's important to make that point, because if that's picked up by somebody who comes in over 11 metres, you say, well, it's in your minutes.
Right.
So it's 11 metres and 10 tonnes.
Thank you for that.
I'm pretty sure it's a typo.
We can rectify that, that's great, thank you. Any other questions? Proposer a correct record, please. Seconder? Those in favour? Thank you very much. Urgent items, I have none. So we will move into agenda item 4, and I'll ask Dale, please, to give us an update with the Waterhall. Thank you.
How are we doing now? Yeah.
Lovely.
Right. Morning, Mr. Chairman. Morning, all. Nice to be back at the IFCA meetings. Thanks for asking me to attend today. Just a quick update on the project that we've got going with Waterhall. As many of you will be aware, we approached Waterhall early part of the season, late part of last year, looking for a method of getting rid of discarded and end-of-life fishing gear. And Waterhall have been nothing short of fantastic, I have to say. This is a superb project where it's combining work with IFCA, ourselves at the Harbour Authority, Waterhall, the local fishing community, Council of the Isles of Scilly, BIFA bins, or BIFA Waste Management Services, and KMS, who are the landing craft. Everybody involved combining together to ensure that we can get our end-of-life fishing gear recycled. Not only is that fantastic, but also free of charge, and that's for fishermen, that's from the council, that's from the harbour, that's from BIFA, the transport to and from the mainland. So it's good to highlight that collaborative working, which has been working superbly throughout this year. Back in August, we sent away our first delivery, which was over a tonne of end-of-life fishing gear, bailed up down at the council waste site at Moorwell, and shipped off by KMS, picked up by BIFA, delivered to the Waterhall reception facility at Roach. And from that 1,060 kilograms that we delivered, there was a 73% yield, 774 kilograms of nets and ropes put forward for recycling, being processed down into pellets and onward for things like these sunglasses I have today, knives, and various other items that Waterhall make. I was just chatting with Nick this morning before the meeting started about how big a business this is, and it's not just Waterhall, there are other companies involved. And it should be promoted and championed, really. This is a fantastic effort to clean our seas, our beaches of discarded, and not always on purpose, by accident, nets, trawls, lines, that sort of thing. We've got a couple of bins on each of the off-islands. We've got Seamus Pender, Over on Briar, we've got Jacob Burns on St Agnes, Adam Morton on St Martin's. We've got bins here at St Mary's Quay and also down at the council waste site, all available for not just fishermen, I have to say, but anybody. We did a beach clean with the school before they went on their summer holidays this year, and highlighting the importance of recycling and highlighting the what should be put in the bins. So people doing beach cleans, beach combers, that sort of thing. People who find rubbish on the beaches, we're impressing on them the need to contact us, and we'll happily take it off their hands and put it in the bins. We've also been approached by Tresco Estate to have one of the bins put over there. Whilst they don't have any commercial fishermen per se, they do have various bits, wash up, netting, that sort of thing, which when it goes into their commercial waste stream, not only is it heavy and bulky and time consuming, but it's also rather expensive to get this done. So we'll be sending a bin to Tresco in the very near future and over the next couple of weeks for them to start storing there. We do highlight to everybody there is a need to make sure this is clean or sorted, nets and lines and those sort of things, and we've got information available to people to highlight what isn't acceptable to put into the bins. Through the course of the year, we've been speaking with the council. Whilst we've got a bin at their site, we're probably going to remove that, and that's because it's probably not best positioned, so we'll make use of that elsewhere. We are aware there's I wouldn't say it's a significant problem, but there's a significant amount of end-of-life fishing gear on Briar, so we're going to give them as many bins as possible. Now at the end of the season, we've already spoken to a local fisherman on St Mary's, where we're going to give him a bin which he can fill himself by end-of-life stuff that he's got at his own store. And one thing I also wanted to mention that the council asked us to highlight was some commercial fishermen may be under the impression that they're going to be charged commercial rates if they take their end-of-life fishing gear to the waste site. That's certainly not the case. It will be free of charge, so it's important just to spread that word around. And finally, we're looking to do another send just before Christmas. We've got half a bin on St Martin's, best part of a bin on St Agnes. We will have a few bins coming down from Briar, and we should have 2 or 3 from St Mary's as well. So again, this is a fantastic collaborative working effort for everybody involved. And yeah, that's the update there. Thank you.
Thank you very much from the chair to you and everyone else concerned. Another good news story from Scilly, and seems like it's going well. So let's keep up the good work. Thank you very much for your report, Dale. Now we'll move on to David Fletcher. David, can you introduce yourself and just come in as you want? You're happy with that, please?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, Dave Fletcher. I've worked in the aquaculture sector for must be about 35, 40 odd years now. Mostly in Southeast Asia. I returned to the UK in the late 90s and not surprisingly discovered that there was no progress in terms of developing aquaculture in Wales. Largely down to the fact that we had no access to European development grants. So I campaigned for about 3 years with all political parties to get the grants made available. That succeeded in 2020, and we had the first big land-based commercial farm built. I think it was 22, originally to farm sea bass, which achieved annual production of 700 to 800 tons per annum. The bank crisis subsequently killed off that project. The Greek company that owned it bankrupted itself in Greece, and subsequently the farm was taken over by a number of companies who I pulled in. I was very keen to see the sites kept productive. If you close down a land-based farm, sea farm, then you can be guaranteed it will never reopen. So we managed to find some buyers. It was Russian money, which was probably not such a brilliant idea, but at least they were able to move very quickly and bought both of the sites in Anglesey and kept them running Meanwhile, they tried to take over the industry in Greece, which I warned that they would probably fail to do and lose a lot of money, which they subsequently did. They lost over 100 million euros in Greece. And the owners of the company then decided to abandon their project in Anglesey. I was still doing a lot of consultancy work. I started a project in Oman, looking at spiny lobster, Panurus homarus. This fishery had been devastated within about 3 years, largely through total absence of any control. And it was during this period that it was suggested to me by the EU fisheries rep in Wales that I should consider going after a grant to do something in Wales rather than winning grants for everybody else. And that's when I decided on the spiny lobster project. That was some 12 years ago. And I secured one European grant, about 260,000, sufficient to set up a small lab. Since 2015 till this date, this year, I've been funding the project entirely by myself. I produced the first juvenile spiny lobsters in 2019, and again in 2021. This was the first record of juveniles being produced in Europe. I've subsequently been looking at developing artificial feeds and improving design of the larval tanks. It's now reached a point where I'm looking to terminate the project because it's basically not very sensible to carry on pouring your own money into something unless you have an intention of commercializing it, which I don't. So I'm currently doing consultancy work for a couple of companies in Europe, one in France, who has succeeded in producing juveniles with my input. And their plans are to look at the possibility of expanding production to support the fishery for about 200 inshore fishermen. Despite the fact they have very good management practices in this fishery, the fishery is still in decline. Fishermen are still having to go further out to sea and stay out at sea longer to manage to land any spiny lobster at all. The only lesson you can take away from this is the fact that it is possible to culture spiny lobsters. And the fact that I've demonstrated that has resulted in a huge amount of interest throughout Europe. And there are now companies looking to farm them directly for the seafood market, but producing smaller sizes of maybe 400 to 500 grams. So there'd be a plate size animal, but not bound by the same legal restrictions for the commercial fishery. It's possible to get animals that size within about 2.5 to 3 years. And that's not even working at optimal culture conditions. So that's really just a very brief summary of where things are at the moment. I don't see any potential of developing a project in Wales, despite the fact we still have the worst managed spiny lobster fishery anywhere in the UK. There is no management effectively. And the fishery is still very much suffering from the crash that everybody suffered from in the 70s and 80s, where there was massive collection of spiny lobsters through dive gangs. There is as I say, no management in Wales, so it's not a really suitable environment for looking at any restocking opportunities. There have been studies in Europe looking at the suitability of crawfish, the European species, for restocking, but this has been based on wild-caught puerili and juveniles, which have been on-grown for a period in captivity and then re-released. And there's been no sort of negative comments in relation to pursuing that direction of replenishing the fishery. To date, it's not been tried with the with the hatchery reared juveniles. That approach has been tried with a number of tropical species. And at the moment, there's one very large commercial farm for Panurus ornatus in Tasmania. Some several tens of millions of dollars have been poured into that project. So that's it. That's a brief summary of where things are with spiny lobsters in general. Happy to answer any questions whenever you have a moment.
Thank you from the chair for that report, David. I'll ask any members, have you any questions for David? Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wondered if whether Colin might put me right on this, whether the lobster hatchery in Padstow would be interested in crawfish development.
Not sure. I couldn't speak on their behalf. They have focused on clawed lobsters as opposed to spinies on this one. Whether they would have the capacity to take them on or not, who knows? That would be an approach to them. But I think it's an idea. It is an opportunity for such a an aquaculture venture here, really, to be one of the first as well. So yeah, many things for it here.
Any of the members?
Is it okay to make a comment on that?
Can you repeat that? Sorry, David.
I was just going to say, if I could comment on that point.
Yes, certainly.
Personally, I don't believe trying to do crawfish at Padstow would be a good idea. Their focus is on the clawed lobster, obviously, and working on the crawfish is a completely different matter altogether. You do require far more advanced techniques for managing water quality. And you also need technicians who are trained up in other areas other than that are required for the clawed lobster, which is a very easy species. Some of the observations I've made for the crawfish in my own little lab really indicate that it's a far superior species to the clawed lobster for culture, apart from one thing. As you may know, its life cycle in the wild, the plankton cycle, can be anything up to 8 months, even longer. Under hatchery conditions where you control every single parameter, this period can be consistently and reliably reduced down to 2 to 3 months. So it's a significant reduction in the time to produce the juvenile. That said, even during the 2 to 3 month period, you need quite well-trained technicians specifically for working on this species. And you also need a backup of really good water quality treatment systems, and have to know how to handle the various disinfectant treatments. One of the most interesting things about the juveniles once you've produced them. But unlike the clawed lobster, you don't have to keep them separate. This is the crawfish. You do not have to keep the juveniles separate. They grow and live very happily in communal tanks. I should emphasize this has only been performed, I've only performed this work with small numbers of animals, but I've tried cramming them into a tank at a high density, and it has no effect in terms of their behavior towards each other. There may be the odd skirmish when they compete for a den in which to hide, but there's no mortality associated with this. Now, this has been repeated by colleagues in Europe, and they have arrived at the same conclusion, working with even larger numbers of juveniles. You can achieve juveniles of anywhere to, I think it was 50, 60 millimeters carapace length in about 11 months from egg hatch. I don't know what would be the ideal size of juveniles for release into the wild, but it probably wouldn't be as large as that. So there are opportunities for producing juveniles in larger numbers without the same demands that Pomaris has in terms of individual containers for on-growing the juveniles. So effectively, you could be releasing larger animals than is the habit with the clawed lobster. It's a far the crawfish I see is a far more suitable animal for farming once you've got the actual larval stage sorted, which is, you know, it's no different to many fish species. They're very difficult during the culture stage, but once you've got the juveniles, they survive very well. But it really does require a purpose-built hatchery designed specifically for the crawfish. The techniques and design built and designed for the clawed lobster will not work.
Thank you for that. Any other members, any questions? No?
Please.
Yeah, Nick.
Hello, David. Nick Jenkins here. I actually supplied you 1 2 buried hens 10, 12 years ago. But,
Right.
yeah. Our recent, it was interesting you said about you can put them all in one tank, because I was hoping that would be the case. They're not as cannibalistic as lobsters, much more social animals. One thing we've noticed in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, we've had a big increase in crawfish numbers, but very heavily biased towards male fish. When you're breeding, is there any bias between the sexes, or would they work out sort of equal?
I think the numbers I've been working with are probably too small, and so I wouldn't really like to say that. What I have noticed is that most of the juveniles I have produced have been female, but that could be because they haven't really reached maturity by the time they've had to be moved on. So I couldn't give you an absolute bulletproof answer to that.
That's interesting, because, say, we've been a little concerned because historically, if you go back 100 years, most fish caught were female, but say in the last 10 years, most have been male. So if you could actually release a bias of females, it would hopefully help the wild stock.
Well, I should emphasize that there's absolute, you know, the species is wide open for understanding its biology and behavior and so on. I mean, I think I'd be correct in saying that there's no real understanding of why the fishery is appearing to recover in Cornwall and so on. Is that true?
Absolutely. But it always has been, you know, I can give you anecdotal evidence from the 1930s, numbers going down. So yeah, we've no idea why it has recovered, but we expect it to crash again, to be honest, those of us who have been around a while. unfortunately.
Yeah,
I was sort of hoping at this meeting you would say, "Oh, I'm going to come here and set up a facility." But do you know of anybody who would be interested, or I mean, presumably you'd need huge grant money from somewhere.
I think it's the sort of project that you undoubtedly need somebody to invest into it. One of the things I've experienced since I succeeded is a very large number of people who have come along and said, yes, we'll invest and we'll set you up. And basically, they're after the information without actually putting any money in. They want the technology without paying for it. And they've got no interest in supporting the restoration of the wild fishery or cooperating with the wild fishers and so on. It's just to provide a product for the seafood restaurants or the trade. My view is that the Scilly Isles would be ideally suited for a hatchery project which was owned and operated by the fishermen. People shouldn't be saying, "Oh well, it's going to be difficult to find people to work in the facility." I don't think you would have a problem. You don't need many people for the hatchery. You would probably get away with 2 or 3 people at the most, possibly 2. I've been doing all the work by myself, and it's a pretty tall ask when you consider that the larval season might go on for 7 months each year, 7 days a week. But with a couple of people, young people who were trained in the techniques and so on, and the facility could be properly managed, it would attract, I'm sure, quite a large number of, or large amount of interest, both from the conservation sector in particular, educational sector in particular, but also it could provide an opportunity for the fishing sector and the Isles of Scilly to diversify into looking at the potential for producing juvenile, producing 400, 500 gram crawfish for the seafood trade. This is certainly what other EU countries are looking at. And I think that's realistic because growing animals onto a kilo and so on is probably not realistic. However, what I have tried is growing the juveniles on in communal systems, but you can produce them in tiered trays, so you can have stacked trays. So this hugely increases the production per square meter. Again, unlike the approach with Hamaris. So if you're looking for, I mean, you need to look for investments, but I would have thought that looking to diversify seafood production and also for supporting the conservation of the crawfish, this should attract funding from a range of sources. It's certainly disappointing to me that there's just no interest. Well, there is interest in Wales. We've got huge amounts of interest from the local council. We've got interest, 100% interest from the local fishermen cooperatives. But I'm afraid when you knock on the Welsh Government office in Cardiff, you're just given a blank look. There's no understanding at all of the species or the potential value in its conservation or expansion.
Could I ask, what do you actually feed them on? Because environmentally, fish farming is disastrous, isn't it? So I'd be much more interested in the sort of conservation side than the fish farming side.
Well, the fish farming side, well, as far as crawfish concerned, restoration alone, it's going to cost money. Somebody has to pay the people working, and they will be eventually very skilled operators. And you can be guaranteed that they would be susceptible to being poached by the private sector in the event that they were not paid decent salaries. As far as the use of fish meals and so on for farming, I don't disagree with you, other than to point out that the protein sources for many fish species or the contribution of wild fish meal to the protein intake of farmed fish is steadily being reduced. It's much lower today for salmon farming than it was 20 years ago. If you add to that the development of land-based farming, the feed you can use for producing fish in land-based farms is far more effectively utilized than it is in cage farms, where there's a lot of waste. So I don't disagree with you when you say you don't like the use of wild fish meal for farming, but I think you also have to take into account that the demand for farmed fish is now so great that farmed fish supply up to 60% plus of seafood consumed. So it's not going to stop tomorrow. And I think the move towards the use of plant proteins and artificial proteins will continue.
Yeah. Well, thank you, David, for sorry, Dale, come in, sorry.
Sorry, David. Just out of interest, when you talk about setup costs, ballpark figure, what would you be looking at?
Well, if you're going to go for, I mean, the small hatchery, well, it's not a hatchery really, the lab that I set up, I mean, it is very small, and it's not adequate for the purposes that I'm trying to, or was trying to achieve. But yeah, I think you would have to be looking at an absolute minimum of 500k to set a facility up. But then I think you would need another 500k for operating for a minimum of 3 to 4 years.
Thank you for that, David. I believe you've got a meeting with the fishermen later on today, 4 o'clock-ish. I hope that goes well for you. I think it's a worthy project that we can come back and address at another meeting when you've seen how the fishermen react with you, which I'm sure they'll be positive. So thank you very much for attending the meeting and giving your presentation.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. Agenda item 6, the Chief Officer's report. Colin.
Thank you. Just as a quick start on this one, always thanks to Rick for keeping the operations going while I'm not here. We'd be a bit snooky without him there. Just run through these. If any questions, do jump in and shout on the way while they're relevant. Only issued 2 permits against the fishing gear permit bylaw this year, and only one of those has been exercised. On that note, we managed to get the consultation live initially, and again, massive thanks to Gemma Pender for helping me go through the system that I completely didn't realise I was going to have to go through to get that consultation live. So that's now live and will close on the 5th of November. So that's just going over the changes to the permit conditions you agreed back at the last meeting. On the theme of permit conditions, it says there, there's been a bit of a setback in terms of the IVMS project, in that one of the manufacturers is now in a dispute with the MMO. I don't know, Emily, have you got any update on that at all? No, right. So, unfortunately, it is a unit that we specify. So, to enable one of our permit holders to actually operate here, I sourced a different type of tracking unit that we put on the boat and worked very well. So I know it issued him an authorisation to be able to use it. So that worked quite well. Again, last time we spoke about permits, and we were looking at survey work to inform, so we can inform the how many, potentially look at how many permits the authority could issue. So just a few slides just to show us we did some work in August this year. We chartered a Cornwall survey boat to come over and basically to complement the ongoing project with the University of Plymouth. In that it's different type of equipment. It's video and still imagery, which there's no still imagery in the Plymouth project. So on that particular slide there, you can see where there's green and red points. That's the data. That's the start and end of camera tows that were carried out by Plymouth back in May. You can see up to the northwest on there. That was what they called the control area. And then what I've got is I also managed to get the trawl tracks from our permit holder from when it was operational a little bit earlier in the year. And you can see that where the treatment lines are, they sort of missed it a little bit. So having the additional information, you can see I've drawn boxes around them. So that enabled us to, when we transferred those to the vessel's plotter, we could stay within them. This is the equipment we used. You can see it's a big camera, big frame camera. The camera system is a sort of like continuous video, but has a DSLR camera fitted in it, so we can take still imagery. Well, what we do is we set it up into the software and then into the survey software, and we can quite accurately, every time we take a still image, we set a range ring around that point. We set it at 15 metres, so we took imagery at still image every 15 metres while the camera was down on the seabed. Quite a challenging site to work, being that it's around about 80, 90 metres deep. So it's all, you can see how it's operated from the starboard side of the vessel. So we worked up in the control area. Now, unfortunately, we found that control wasn't really much of a control. As you can see where the lines are, this is an image taken from Survey Boats Navionics. You can see the contours there. That's not really, that's not really a good representation of trawl ground. So as you can see in these images that we took there, these are the still images from that tow. It's not representative of trawl ground. So to draw any comparisons, we didn't feel was appropriate because it was never going to work like that. So what we did, we set up a new control, which you can sort of see is the middle of those boxes, which was a little bit out on more appropriate ground. So those are the tows we did at each station. Green line was where we started, and the blue points are actually circles, represent where a still image was taken at each of those points. So you can see we've got a control and the treatment area down to the southeast. That one. So this is the treatment area. These are the images taken there. As you can see, not really showing much in the way of visual impact there. And the new control looked a little bit more. This was like this. So a bit more similar, but the data's all been outsourced for reporting. It's not, the final report's not quite ready, but in discussions with the contractors, saying really and truthfully, even the new control isn't particularly similar to the treatment area itself. Early indications are that the treatment area is actually quite quick to recover, quite subject to sort of tidal conditions there despite the depth. So recovery on sort of like surface is quite quick back from any impacting. But just got to wait for the final report to come through. So bear with me a second. Any questions on the survey stuff? So that will go forward. That will help Plymouth. I will submit that to Plymouth to go towards the study. But we were quite concerned that control wasn't a control. It was not similar at all. hopefully we'll be able to, moving forward, move that on. And I think in some respects the control ought to be even closer to the treatment area. The IFCA University work that was sort of half planned for this year is a continuation of the other baited camera. I think due to the researchers' workload this year, getting the PhD finally written up on the papers meant that it didn't happen this year, but we're looking to potentially look at doing something next year again. Got a meeting teed up with them for the end of this year. The survey, the fishery research officer role, Chesney's doing really well and getting in a lot of data. Just a few points I can show you at the moment, some interesting things coming out of it. So in terms of lobsters, one of the things we are really noticing there is that you see there seems to be this year a lot of larger female lobsters on the ground, which is quite interesting. Got a mean carapace of 89, just below the minimum size, pretty much expected. And then, strangely, again, on this, we're talking 42% of the females are at minimum size or above, and 60% of males are at minimum size or above. Almost 1-to-1 ratio. That's the number of buried lobsters, females, in there. That's on the secondary y-axis on the right-hand side. Not very clear, that, actually. We couldn't think of a good way to do it, but that's just showing the number of females at those carapace lengths that were buried. So it's actually quite low on that.
Sorry, I've got to formally ask. This is all the results over the summer, presumably. Do you have anything for time spots?
No, this is collective.
Right,
this
because
is everything together.
I mean, just anecdotally, I would say that, you know, talk about larger females. Depending on what time of year you're doing it, you will get larger females. So until we got sort of years of data, you probably can't.
Exactly.
Yeah, but
possibly why we're not seeing quite so many buried females, because of the time of the year. We're starting to see them
if you did that in March, April, May, you'd see
massive
30-40% of buried females, I would guess.
Yeah. So not unexpected, given the time scale that the date. You know, this isn't. You know, this is as near to reporting as we can at the moment. Craws. Very interesting again. You have to note the different scale on those. The female above, you notice the scale is much smaller than the males. Just going back to your question, Nick, of the balance. Potentially a lot of that is due to fishing method. Nets do seem to have a much more of a skewing towards males. Pots in other places, there's studies in the Mediterranean where the ratio is much closer to 1-to-1.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, historically, it was sort of 90% female in pots, but even now, I've caught a reasonable number in pots this year, and there's a greater proportion of females in pots than there are in nets. I would totally agree. Yeah.
One of the things something that has changed since the last study in 2023, we now see it's 27% female as opposed to 12. So whether that's there is definitely a change there. The mean size has actually gone up in both males and females for crawfish since 2023. It was, for females, it was 106, now it's 109, and males have gone from 113 to 120 mil. So the animal, it seems to be the mean size is shifting to larger animals there.
Sorry, I mean, I would definitely agree with that, and I think 3 years ago we threw back huge numbers of slightly undersized, and this last couple of years we've actually been landing them, I think. So yeah, whether we have the small ones coming through is the next question.
Yeah, exactly. And again, so not many buried females, but over the timing that this is reporting for, then, you know, it's not uncommon to see them. Some of the interesting points in bycatch there, 17% of the total catch was bycatch. I mean, the diversity has actually increased since 2023, gone from 9 to 13 different species. There's a couple there that have been missed off because they were this was produced just before the last couple of trips. Octopus, obviously being one of the major ones, jumped to 11% as opposed to 1% as it was 2 years ago. So that's showing a definite change there. And elasmobranchs, presumably mostly in dogfish, was at 27% as opposed to 3%. Dogfish, they've increased to 27% of the bycatch. That's, again, I think it's slightly out of that plot there. So, and of course, that little image was one of now, yes, wrapped around a cray. So that was taken last week, that one. And they're starting to, going back to some of the other points in there in octopus. Obviously here we didn't have the numbers seen on the south coast during the summer, but certainly seeing them now, which is sort of going into sort of anecdotal reports of them being seen on the north coast of Cornwall as well now in numbers, and a second wave of small ones starting to come through on the south coast, which is presumably the juveniles from this year. Yeah, no, so. But unusually, so it's within the study. This is the fourth real bloom of them since about 1900, and all very similar condition at the same time, apparently. So from that, recreational potting issued a few more permits this last year than the previous year. No real issues there, Rick, were there? Just a few early in the season, the usual reminders that we do change colour of the permit tags every year. You can't reuse them. The gentle reminders. A few bluefin. At the time of writing, we'd had 10 landed here. 3 more since then. So moving on, moving towards the quota, I would think, with a bit of time left to go. Few sea patrols carried out this year. Additional with contract staff as well, have enabled us to get out and certainly keep an eye on some oversized vessels working very, very close to the district boundary, and some sort of conversations with them. That's been good. Vigilance out the water now for the winter. Storm Amy made us have a fairly good scratch of our heads and decided that we probably better to get her out now, ready. But she's in a position where she can be quite easily launch Rick, isn't she? Now, if we need to, and get her out. The Workboat Code 3 gap analysis report has been done last week. The surveyor came over to do her annual sign off. And to be honest, not quite as bad as we feared. I think there's been quite a bit of, there's been some changes to the code now, or in terms of how the MCA are interpreting the code. So it's not too bad. There's not too much to do there. Luckily, we've got a new home for the container. Eddie over at Morwell has been great and found us a slot, hasn't he? Somewhere where we can go so we can move fairly quickly when we need to. That's probably about it on that one, Chairman. If there's any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Just a point on paragraph 11 about the Vivio crabbers getting very close to the 6-mile limit. Isn't there a buffer zone? There certainly is for trawling. I think it's about 1.5 times the length of the warp, something like that. They've got to stay outside. But I just wondered if a buffer zone included crabbers.
No, there isn't a buffer zone either. We can't dictate where people go. We've got no jurisdiction outside of our district, so we can't dictate we can't have any measures pertinent to the district outside of the district. So it's just to remind, frequent patrols down that way, just to remind, our stakeholders that we're there and that's where the line is, and you're oversized.
Not as a matter of interest, do we know if they're actually catching much crab there now, or what are they after when they're up close to 6 mile? Lobsters, crawfish, or?
Given the ground, I would say probably crab. to be honest with you. I think, Rick, you had a chat with them, didn't you?
I did. Their turnaround time, usually they're out for 3 or 4 days. Some of them are out there just for 2 days, which suggests they're getting good fish straight into Newlyn, unload, straight back out again. Down. With pots? Yeah, with pots, yeah.
Any other questions for Colin? No? Thank you for your report, Colin. We'll move on to agenda item 7, the crustacean shellfish bylaw, in the hands of you again, please.
There you go. The authorities had an approach from the Fishermen's Association asking us to investigate potential for a shellfish permit, not a shellfish permit, a shellfish bylaw, a bylaw to cover shellfish species, basically in terms of to ensure the longevity of the fishery. Basically, there's concerns about crawfish, as Nick said. There's a potential, experience shown that crawfish fluctuate in their abundance, and many other issues here. Particularly, we have a disadvantage logistically getting shellfish ashore. There's additional costs to anyone working here. So, looking at looking at measures to benefit the fishery and those involved in it here. So nothing really. I mean, certainly no measures to look at this point. This is more about asking or seeking direction from you as authority members for enable us officers to start work on looking at the potential for measures, to start consulting what measures would be, what people think would work, what would be good, if not. But it's just the direction to get moving on a measure, potentially. That was the recommendation.
Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just a bit of historical background on this. I mean, I checked back yesterday through the minutes of the Fishermen's Association, and it goes back to, before 2014 and 2015 in particular. But some suggestions made at the time, I know this is, I don't want to preempt the discussions about this, but for instance, one of the suggestions was 300 pots per boat inside the 3 nautical mile limit, but no limits outside that. That came from Harry Legg's father. Kit suggested that one. Or the other suggestion was 600 pots per man, not per boat. So in other words, a 2-man operation could carry 1,200 pots. But the majority at the time didn't see the need for a draft bylaw, permit bylaw. The reason is because they reckon the conditions already in place, such as feed notching, minimum length sizes, and restrictions that altogether, the normal restrictions would be sufficient rather than any more. And I remember at the time, in fact, in 2013, I went to London, and DEFRA at that time were considering a capping limit on brown crab and lobster. And I produced some data at that meeting which proved that here in Scilly, in particular, weather and sea conditions act as a natural cap. You didn't need any further restrictions on that. And I think it died a death in the end. I don't think it continued. I think it basically was with problems with the North Sea. It was getting decimated with and undersized lobsters, because their limit is, I think, is 87, whereas ours is 90. But if a bylaw is considered, don't forget, I know you said about protecting the environment and so on. You must be very careful it's not seen to be protective of our local industry, because DEFRA would kick it out as it would be deemed as discretionary. In other words, we put the bylaw in place to protect our own industry, which is not allowed. So you've got to be careful. But a permit scheme under the precautionary principle would be very acceptable, I think. And anyway, I look forward to seeing what the investigation comes.
I think the situation from 10, 12 years ago is very different.
Yeah.
We weren't there wasn't the level of activity outside of the district that there is now. Certainly circling, as we spoke about earlier, is very different. And you're absolutely right. We could never have just think of the word, and it's not discretionary, is it? Completely lost on me now.
I think you're probably looking for discriminatory.
It's discriminatory bylaw, but then that would never be, that's not possible. So down that line. So I mean, it's looking at all these matters to find out what would work best, what would be workable, what's needed, what's wanted.
Am I right that Cornwall has a shellfish permit bylaw, and how does it work?
Yes, it does. It does. It works on. It's not a permission to fish. It's effectively a bag limit. So without a permit, you are restricted to a small number of animals a day that you can take. What it does do is provide a huge amount of information. Cornwall's probably got the best data set for a fishery, probably an inshore fishery in the country. It's been running for probably best part of 30 years now. And we've got very fine scale data for it, which has enabled us, as like Emily would know, within working with a bylaw in Cornwall, it's the evidence we've been able to provide has been huge.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm glad you made the point in paragraph 6 about bylaw making is not a quick process. And I remember when the DEFRA's when the IFCAs was set up, I was told by the chief officer of DEFRA at the time, Nigel Gooding, to say that it would speed up the bylaw making progress. But at that time, it took about 2 years to put a bylaw through, and it said it would speed that up. But now it's 4 or 5 years, so it's worked in reverse.
Can be. The advantages with this sort of, I think with this approach is it's very much a bottom-up approach. Where we're looking for sort of like industry direction on measures rather than being imposed, implementing what's considered to be appropriate.
I don't know if you actually want a proposal on this, but I'll propose that the officers are authorised to liaise with a fishermen's association to sort of start the process, as it were.
Thank you. A seconder? Those in favour? Carried. Thank you for your report, Colin.
Thank you.
I do apologise to the two ladies. I didn't welcome you, I don't think, at the start of the meeting, but I do forget things occasionally. Welcome. Thank you both for coming for the meeting. As far as I know, there's no reports from either. Any updates you wanted to give verbally? I'm sure you... Emily, yeah.
Thanks, Chairman, and morning, everyone. Thanks for having me over. It's always a pleasure to come over. Just a couple of things from me, from a marine planning perspective, just that a couple things to note is that the Southwest 3-year report on the Southwest Marine Plan has now been published. It's looking to carry with no amendments, and the Fisheries mapping phase 3 report has also been done, which is looking at mapping important areas for fishing for over 12-metre vessels, which probably not so relevant inside the district, but relevant outside, has also been published. I will give you the links, Colin, when you do the papers, so you can put them in for next time. And then just to note that the crawfish fishery is closed this year from the 17th of November through to the end of May. That was the result of the consultation that was undertaken this summer by the MMO. Bluefin, I don't have any updates for Bluefin, but just in case anyone did have any questions about Bluefin, happy to answer them. And then also you may have seen that a pollock TAC has been advised for next year, which hopefully means some kind of UK level quota for pollock next year. Not entirely sure what that will be, but I think it will be more than the 0 TAC that what we've had for the past 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you for that update. Just before I close the meeting, members, the next scheduled IFCA meeting, if you want to pencil it in your diaries, is going to be 11 a.m. on the 15th of January. And with that, I'll thank you all for attending and close the meeting at 12 o'clock midday. Thank you very much.